words of life that go beyond this life. And I pray that we, as your men, will be better prepared to help people get closer to you just as a result of studying together tonight. And to that end, I ask your blessing on our time. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right. 1 Timothy, these are Apostle Paul's words to Timothy, an evangelist. There are a few evangelists that are mentioned to us in the Bible, but Timothy and Titus are the two that received letters. The other evangelists that we know about would be like Philip the evangelist, or Stephen was an evangelist. Some others are designated as evangelists in the New Testament. But here in the second chapter, we started off the second chapter last Tuesday night. It really does look like, if you look down to chapter 3, verses 14 and 15, he says, although I hope to come to you soon, I'm writing you these instructions so that if I'm delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Okay, when he's talking about how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, I take it to mean that chapter 2 and 3, he's summarizing what he's just got through saying about God's people collectively and when they get together. So sometimes we're just talking about individual Christian practices. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. And the reason I'm belaboring this point is he's going to flat out say, I don't permit women to teach or have authority over men. I don't think that means in everyday life. I think that means at our church gatherings. And it fits with the rest of the context here. We last week, the first few verses 1 through 8 of chapter 2, he's talking about, well, he starts off, he mentions 4 of the 7 words that you find in the New Testament for prayer. And he's talking about, so part of what he's emphasizing here is when the church gets together, we ought to have a lot of focus on prayer. And prayer, by the way, I appreciate the fact there's 7 different words here, because too many times people think prayer is just asking God for stuff, right? There's so many different aspects to prayer. There's praise, there's confession, which, by the way, I think is probably something that ought to be included in our collective time. So confession, a lot of times you think personally, and there are some things that we ought to be confessing personally. But sometimes there's things we ought to confess collectively. If we as a church have dropped the ball on something, I think it's appropriate to confess that as a sin, ask God's forgiveness, and ask God's help, right? So there are things we ask, there's praise, there's confession, there's all sorts of different kinds of prayer. And my favorite kind of prayer in the Bible, by the way, is a narrative prayer, which is simply talking to God about what's going on in your everyday life, even when you don't have anything to ask for, right? Finding examples of that, especially in the book of Jeremiah, which is full of his personal prayers. Anyway, he's talking about praying for kings, those in authority, and he gets down to kind of a summary statement, verses 1 through 8, talking about the importance of prayer. But in verse 8, therefore I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger and disputing. I think that's the verse we finished off with last week, right? Okay, so help me with this. Let's summarize. What does this mean to lift holy hands of prayer? Are you supposed to lift your hands up when you pray?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. It's okay if you do. It's okay if you don't. I don't think that's the emphasis of this. What is the emphasis of this verse? What's he saying? Want men everywhere to lift up holy hands of prayer.
Hoping that say something about, like opening to God. It's symbolic, right?
Okay, and what would that imply? What's he trying to convey through that idea?
I would think
Doing holy things.
Not holding
that
on to
you
anything.
pray for genuine, legitimate purposes, not to pray revenge on somebody, but to pray in a manner that's beneficial.
Okay, I think there's a lot to that. Is it ever okay to pray against somebody?
Yes.
Yeah, they're called imprecatory prayers.
Hatton's preacher's prayer in World War II.
I think there's a time and a place to pray against something. I think we have to be very, very careful with that. You know, this idea, especially when we're talking about hands and things like that, if we're not talking physically about lifting holy hands in prayer, and one of the reasons I don't think we're talking about physically is because we have several examples when they didn't lift their hands in prayer, and it specifically mentions, like Elijah with his head between his knees while he prayed, or people getting down on their face while they pray. So there's a lot of different positions in prayer, and sometimes they're just appropriate, right? Sometimes it does put you in a different frame of mind when you get down on your knees to pray. I love that. I don't do that very often, but boy, sometimes it really helps put you in a different mindset, right?
But have anything to do with being submissive to God?
I think so. Okay, so when we're not talking about physically, when we talk about hands, I mean, let me put it this way. If a section of the Bible talks about use both your head and your hands, what's it talking about?
Think about how you're acting.
What you're thinking, and what do the hands represent?
What you're doing.
What you're doing. Yeah, I really do think the emphasis here is on the holy, right? Make sure you're doing things God's way, right? But the hands frequently, when they're used symbolically or as an illustration, they represent what are you doing? So one of the things in my lifetime that people used to say is put feet on your prayer. So don't just pray about something. What are you going to, don't just pray for the starving people in Haiti. Yeah, go there, pack some food, right? Or support or whatever, different opportunities we have. So this idea of lifting up holy hands, I think that's what he's emphasizing here is the make sure you're doing it God's way, but this idea of putting action. Don't just pray about it, do something about it. And then without anger and disputing, I think that's, Brother Rick here, I think that's the part of the point here is not selfishly trying to use the power of God just to make things the way we want them because we're upset about something or something else. We ought to be upset about some things. The Bible says, be angry, yet do not sin. So it's okay to be angry about things as long as it's not just a personal, selfish thing. Angry about the things God wants to be about. Okay, so that kind of summarizes what he's talking about when he talks about prayer and emphasizing how prayer ought to be not just part of our everyday life. 1 Thessalonians 5 says we're supposed to be praying without ceasing. Right? So it should be a part of our everyday life. I think that means keep the communication open with God at all times. Remember, God's omnipresent. He's with you at all times. So talk to him regularly, right? I think that affects everything we do. Okay, after prayer, it's going to talk about women. So remember our men's Bible study? Let's hit this one hard. Let's go ahead and have verses. Rick, I'll go ahead and start with you. And we'll go around the circle here. Let's have verses 9 through, let's just do 9 and 10 first. Let's break this down in pieces.
Okay. I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God.
Okay. Again, I will remind you, I really do think this is talking about the context when we get together. I don't think this says anything about the way women dress on a day-to-day basis. I do think this is talking about at our gathering. I do think there's a principle that would apply to everyday life, okay? But the main point that he's making here is, what you ought to be known for is not the person who wears the clothing. You ought to be known as the person who does the good deeds for God.
Well,
that ought to be a reference.
I have a question.
Yes.
At that time period in the pagan world and their festivals and stuff like that, they were doing the elaborate hairstyles and dressing up to look the nines. So
yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Oh, yes. But that part's not necessarily bad. But what is associated with a lot of times with the God. But I having said all that, I think the point transcends culture and time. I think the point is you shouldn't be known for how you can doll yourself up. You should be known for you're a good person, right? I think that's a basic idea. But I think it carries extra weight when we put this in the context of this is when we gather together. Because I know this will be recorded, but I'll just go ahead and say it. Sometimes women in particular can be distracting if they look too good. Right? And yeah, I'll just leave it at that because I don't have to say anymore. I'm talking to guys. You don't talk about
When we were kids, back eons ago, we had our school clothes,
Yes.
we had our play clothes, we had our go to town clothes, then we had our church clothes.
Church clothes. That's right. That's right.
I mean, there were certain things you wore only when you went to church.
And you know, there's part of that I really appreciate. I'm interested in what you guys think about this because I really appreciate this. In Haiti, on my mind, really made me appreciate this more because in Haiti you can imagine the poverty there and everything. I've only been on one mission trip to Haiti. I was there for 2 weeks, and it really made quite an impression on me for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things I noticed is we're talking dirt poor. It's often referred to as a fourth world, not a third world, because it's that bad in Haiti. It's just, you wouldn't believe how, I mean, street people here have better living conditions than the normal people in Haiti. It is unbelievably awful. Having said that, the people who have clothes, they would save their best clothes for the church. And it was quite common on a Sunday gathering, see, and it just pops because people there are so black. When they wear white shirts, it's like, man, how did you get that shirt so clean? Because you live in a place where there's dirt everywhere. Well, they made a point of Saturday before Sunday, they would take time to make sure their white shirts were clean because it was just something special. I really appreciate that. I think that says something special.
I think it shows a sign of respect.
I think it is a sign of respect. Now, in the balance, though, I totally agree with this. I think some people carry it too far. It's clothing sometimes can be a class thing. I'm telling you, I know I watch way too much Korean TV. Don't watch regular TV, but in Korea, especially with the women, one of the first things they notice is where'd they buy that purse? You know, because it's a Hermes. I had no idea what a Hermes purse was until I started watching Korea. And so every time on these Korean shows, I'm sitting there with my wife watching these Korean shows. Right? Lady comes on with a Hermes purse, we'll pause it, she'll look it up. $12,000 purse.
Oh,
Right. Oh, no kidding. I mean, worse than that. And some of the watches and stuff like that. So for some people, to dress nice and say, this is important, I got cleaned up, I actually took a shower before I came to church, I think that's respectful.
yes.
But to make a statement like, here's my Rolex, that's one of the few things I know, like Rolex, my wife's got the Hermes bag, stuff like that, I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. I think that's violating what it's talking about here.
Having a Armani suit. Having a Armani suit.
Yeah. I know what that is.
Or Sicilian or something.
Prideful.
Which, by the way, in a certain context for certain people, I think that's really okay.
And, in a business setting, that would be great.
Yeah, I actually saw a special where they were talking about the suits that Trump has made for him and how much they cost. You know what? He can afford it. I think it's appropriate. In that setting, I think that's perfectly fine.
Like in a job setting like that, you're trying to make a statement.
Yeah.
And in church, that would not be the statement you
Okay,
make.
I like what you just said. Trying to make a statement. If we're trying to make a statement with our clothes, sometimes it's not. In this case, it's trying to one up everybody else in class. Then sometimes people dress down to the point trying to make a statement too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I just really think that's inappropriate too, as for the gathering in particular. So trying to make points on both sides here, but I really do think the context here, we're talking about when we gather together, why is he focusing on women instead of everybody?
Because they're always trying to be fancy.
They're trying to.
Women and men have women and men are different.
Yeah.
We agree on that. And they have unique temptations. And this dolling yourself up, which, by the way, I think that's a very appropriate thing if a woman wants to doll herself up for her husband. But to make a statement to the outside world or something like that, and especially at the gathering, that's kind of out of place. Right? Just like a public display of affection. I hope you have that a lot at your home. But I don't think that's appropriate at a gathering. Right? Shouldn't be doing stuff like that. Just practical wisdom. And I think that's part of what he's saying here. But he's going to make a stronger point. Let's go ahead and, after talking about the way they dress, and he says the real point here is good deeds, being a good person, right? Then in 11, and let's have 11 through, yeah, let's have 11 through 14. 11 through 14.
A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get the next verse in just a minute. What's the point he's laying out here? The point he's laying out here, this is not a popular point, but it is a biblical point. And he's saying, here's the standard. He says, I don't permit a woman. What's the restriction he's putting on a woman?
Teach or assume authority over a man.
I would say two restrictions. He says, I don't permit her to teach or assume authority over men. I would take that to mean to teach men or to have authority over men in the church gathering, because that's what we're talking about here. The reason I would say that is because Paul, the same author, says that the older women ought to teach the younger women. Mm-hmm. And in fact, he's going to include that in this letter. We're going to see that a little bit later, right? So, he's not talking about general stance. He's talking about the time we get together. And the other point that I would like to just put out on the table is this. He explains why. And he goes back to creation to explain why. The reason I think that's important to acknowledge is some people will say, oh, well, this was only because of the situation at Ephesus. Or this was only because of what was going on in the first century. And it's as though the Holy Spirit through Paul wants to make clear, no, this is not a situation, it's not a culture. This is a principle of the way God made man and woman. And so he goes back to creation to make his point. So because of that, I take this to mean this is a standard we ought to keep today. So is there a restriction put on women in the church? In the church gathering. I think there are two. I don't think a woman ought to be preaching the sermon on Sunday morning. And I don't think a woman, ought to be an elder in the church. And that's what he's going to talk about next, as far as the leadership of the church. We have a few examples of women being deaconesses and serving in other ways and teaching the other women and helping in ministry in all sorts of ways. And we have examples of women being involved in leadership positions in business and in government in the scripture with no problem. So the only restriction I see here is in the church, there are two things that women are not supposed to do, right? That position of leadership or in the position of teaching. Both of these are written in the present tense in the Greek, which means ongoing. Because of that, if there's a one-off, if somebody came in one time, like a missionary team, and a woman gets up to give a presentation, I personally wouldn't have any problem with that at all. Because he's just giving a report or doing a presentation, even if it's scripture involved and things like that. But to be the preacher of the church, there are churches who have women ministers. I think that violates what this verse, I think, clearly says. Now, this is the passage, it goes back to creation, right? It says it's an Adam and Eve thing, right? It goes back to the very beginning. The passage in 1 Corinthians, however, is not a general principle for all churches. It may have been a general principle for all churches at that time, but it's definitely a cultural, time-locked situation, because he's talking about miraculous gifts, which in that very context, he makes the point, are only going to be around for a certain amount of time. They don't continue. And with the miraculous gifts, remember which one he focuses on the most?
Prophecy.
That's the one he wants them to focus on the most.
You mean in the negative sense?
Yeah, the one he has to spend the most time talking about is speaking in tongues. And when he talks about speaking in tongues, he makes this flat statement as far as if you're going to have speaking in tongues, there needs to be an interpreter, only 2 or 3 at a time, and
Women keep quiet.
no women. So if you're going to do those things, one of the things he makes extremely clear is no women are allowed to do it. Which I find just really interesting, because the churches that want to practice miraculous gifts today and say that it's not just a cultural thing, it still applies today, they will go with part of that, but then they stop when it says women aren't allowed to do this. Not publicly. Okay, I just put that out on the table to say that one, I totally agree, is probably just talking about something that was just happening at a specific time in that culture, first century. I agree with that. This one, I don't think so, because he goes back to creation to talk about it. Now, the next point he makes is verse 15. What does verse 15 say?
Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control.
Okay, what does this verse mean? He just got through making a point. I do want to make one other point, and then we'll get into the details here. There's a restriction put on women as far as what they're allowed to do in the church. Every time I say that, though, I always want to make the point. There's restrictions put on all of us in the church.
Right.
There's a lot of things that I can point to almost every person and say, guess what? You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because you're not an elder. An elder is supposed to do that, right? Or I can point to me. Mark, you're not allowed to do that. Why? You're not supposed to be pulling the younger women aside to teach them. The older women are supposed to be doing that. There's restrictions put on everybody. We're part of the body of Christ. Certain things we can do, certain things we can't do. So to say that women can't do these two things, we're not just isolating, saying they're the only ones forbidden. Everybody's forbidden from something, right? And so I want to put that in the bigger context. But they definitely are restricted in these two ways. I mean, if you can point it out to me some other way to read these verses, I'm all ears, but I've read this a bunch and it seems pretty clear. Okay. The next thing that he says, though he goes back to creation, this is the way God made things, and he seems to be saying, and it's not just this is the way God created things. What God really wants from women is
Make babies.
what it sounds like. There's 2 major ways to take this verse. Let's look at it one more time. They're going to be saved through childbirth, it says, right? Mm-hmm. Women will be saved through childbirth. What does that mean?
Wait a minute. There's a proviso with that. Women shall be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. If they don't do that other part, just having kids is just having kids.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Is this talking about women, if they do that in the right way, if they continue in faith, love, and holiness, if they do that and have children, then they're fulfilling the role that God intended for them to fulfill, and everything. Is that what this verse is saying?
Yes.
Sure could be. That sure could be. There's another major possibility, though, in what this is saying.
Would it have something to do with what he just said before that about how she was deceived and sinned?
Okay.
Is this something to do with how she can atone for that?
How could she atone for that? How could she atone for sin?
Yeah.
There's only one who can atone for sin.
Jesus, right.
Where did he come from?
Yes,
Came
child.
from a woman.
Woman, right. Seed.
That's another major way to take this passage is he's saying, listen, Eve was the one who was deceived, which we'll talk about Adam in a minute, but Eve was the one who was deceived, and that's what he's basing his, I can't just say this, I've got to explain it the best I see this. He seems to be saying the reason women aren't allowed to do these two things is because women are different from men. And one of the ways you can tell that women are different from men is go back and look at the way they're made from the very beginning. Even from the beginning, it was Eve who's the one who was deceived, which implies Adam did it full knowing what he was doing. So it implies greater guilt on Adam. But Eve was deceived here, right? Okay. Then having said that, he said, but if she can found, I don't want to ad-lib here, he says, but women will be saved through childbearing. So he could be saying, but the answer to sin actually comes through a woman. In fact, there's a change here that you don't see in the English very often. He changes from the singular to the plural. And it literally says, in the Greek, it literally says, but women will be saved through the childbearing. So it sounds like it's talking about Christ came into the world through a woman. So he's the answer to all this. But it could also mean, I've got to throw both these options out here on the table. It could also mean that men and women are different. And one of the things women need to do with their motherly instincts and the way they are different is they need to focus on the family and on children with all that. There is a syndrome, if you ever listen to Jordan Peterson, he will talk about this, and it's called the devouring mother syndrome. And he just makes I'm just going to throw this out there, guys. He makes the point, wokeism, and a lot of the cancel culture, he says about 90% of that come from women. He says if you'll notice in the universities, it's usually championed by women. And most of the time, it's women who don't have children of their own. And what they are doing is the reason they want to put restrictions on people, and you can't say that because you're going to hurt somebody else's feelings, is what they're, as a psychologist, he's saying they're treating everybody like they're toddlers. And so they're putting rules to protect everybody out there. And he calls it the devouring mother syndrome. And it's a great thing to have that kind of protection of a 2-year-old. It's an awful thing to take that kind of stuff and make government laws based on it, treating everybody like them too. So it's possible that he's talking about fulfilling your role the way you're supposed to in the family. But if he is talking about that, what does that say to women who aren't able to have children?
Well, if they're not able, it's not
It's not their fault.
their fault. People, but some women might be still faithful and holiness, beloved, but choose not to have children. That's the one I'm curious about.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. That's really scary to me because in our culture it has been promoted. You're not going to really be yourself if you have children. Then you can't be a professional and stuff like that. So you're limiting yourself, and so that's one of the things that women have been encouraged to put off having children until later, so they can advance their career and really become all that they can become. I think that's a sad thing that our culture is promoting.
By the same college professors that don't have children.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, it's amazing. It's amazing the people who want to say there's no difference in sex at all. I mean, we speak out of both sides of our mouth all the time, right? As a culture, but they say there's no difference at all, and then it's promoted by the women, and this devouring woman thing really does fit in. I don't want to talk too much more about that. I just want to put that on the table. There's two possibilities here. I think the Greek actually lends itself a little bit more towards the idea Jesus is the answer. But it is possible that he's talking about there's just differences between the sexes. And women with that kind of energy need to focus on children. Even if it's not your own children, you need to help with other children. But you need to put that energy there instead of standing up in church and telling everybody this is the way you need to behave. Right? That's the greater context here. And he is, I really do think, talking about the meetings. Okay, he goes from that, again, talking about the church. Okay, women aren't allowed to do this, so who are supposed to be the leaders? And he's going to, why would he, we're going to start the 3rd chapter here, why would he spend so much time telling Timothy about what elders are supposed to be? Timothy's not an elder.
But he's going to find them.
According to Titus 1:5, the only way we know in the Bible that elders were chosen, other than apostles, we don't have apostles anymore. So other than apostles, the only ones that we know that appointed elders in the church would be the evangelist. So this makes perfect sense that he tells him as an evangelist, here's what you're looking for in an elder, right? Elder, give me a couple other synonymous terms, other titles used to describe elders in the Bible. Overseer,
Bishop.
elder, pastor,
Bishop one?
bishop, all used synonymously, right? It's not until the 2nd century where they start using the term bishop distinctively from pastor, elder. They start making it 2 different classes. But you don't find that in the Bible. They're all used interchangeably, right? So these leaders, he's going to say, this is what you need to look for, and he's going to come up with, I have this numbered somewhere, 14, 15 different qualifications, if you will. 15 different things you should look for in a leader for the church. So let's have verses 1 through, oh boy. Let's just take this slow. Let's just have the first 2 verses.
Here is a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above approach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach.
Wow, there's a lot just in the first 2 verses, right? Okay, let's try to list this out. What's the first requirement or qualification that he's looking for? It says his trustworthy statement, by the way, is his way of saying, hey, I'm not just giving you my opinion here. This is a guideline you ought to follow in the church, right? Trustworthy statement. Here you go. Requirement number 1.
One that aspires.
Aspire, desiring, wanting. So if somebody doesn't want to serve in this way, which I'll just tell you as an evangelist working with people, this was a hard one because a lot of people who really want to be elders, it's kind of like they're humble guys. And it's kind of like, I don't know if I should. And it's kind of like, yes, you should. You know, and I don't want to twist somebody's arm too much. But the thing that I think is important here is the desire. It's not a desire to lord over, because Jesus makes a real point. Leaders in the church are not like the leaders in the world. It's the desire to wash people's feet, like John 13. So if you're willing to be that kind of leader, I think you're aspiring to something great.
Can it also be, I have a desire to do what God wants?
Yes.
Maybe I don't really, I'm not all excited about leading this bunch because I know I can go, but I want to do it because God needs people.
Yes. I was just listening to a video today. This guy, he's a Christian. His name's Arthur Brooks, but he teaches at, anyway, he's a psychologist and a social scientist, and he was talking about your desires and what you want, especially related to work. And he said there are 3, I just found this interesting. He said there are 3 main feelings or emotions that you ought to consider, because he's not a touchy-feely guy. He's really focused on is what you do, it's not so much what you feel. But he said, for example, if somebody gives you a new job opportunity, the example he gave, guys hitting it out of the park in sales department, right? Just great at sales. And so the president of the company calls him in and says, you have been so fantastic in the sales department. I'm going to put you in charge of all the salesmen. You're going to be vice president in charge of sales now. And I'm going to give you a $175,000 bump in your salary. And all this other stuff. So he goes home and he talks to his wife, and his wife's like, yes, we can use that money. It'll be great. He says there are 3 emotions this guy needs to consider. Number 1 is the excitement. Is this exciting to do this? Number 2 is fear, because there's a lot. But number 3, he calls deadness. Deadness. And he says, the excitement ought to be 75%, the fear ought to be 25%, and the deadness needs to be 0. He says if you feel any deadness at all, you need to say no. And his point about deadness is this. If you're a great salesman and now you're going to be managing all the salespeople, that means you're not doing sales anymore. It's kind of like, yeah, well, that's not who I am. You just died as a salesman. And he says it doesn't make any difference how much money they dangle out in front of you and everything else. It's got to be something that you can do. And even if it scares you a little bit, that's okay. But if you're dead. Anyway, I like this terminology there and everything, and I think that kind of fits with this idea. It ought to scare you to be a leader, right? But if it makes you feel dead, right? Then that's not for you. It's not for you.
Those who can't sell, teach.
Yeah, okay. So the desiring will be number 1. What's number 2? In verse 2. Notice he uses the term overseer here. You ought to be what?
Bishop. Above reproach.
Above reproach. Does anybody have a different translation for above reproach?
Blameless.
What does it say?
It's blameless.
Blameless. Okay, blameless. This comes from a word in the Greek language that literally means without handles. I was helping Seth yesterday. We had one of these care portal things where we were moving some stuff, and every time I get in one of these moving things, I always think to myself, why don't they put handles on furniture? You know,
Right.
If they just put handles on it,
Yeah,
you know?
put the straps through it.
Yes. But when you try to, especially when it's mattresses are the worst. If they don't put a handle on the end of a mattress, you're just trying to squeeze it together.
Yeah, they're going everywhere.
Okay. I love that image though, because the idea is this. If you're somebody who's got handles on you, then you shouldn't be in leadership. If people can look at you and say, oh yeah, but I know what he did here and I know what he's involved in there and stuff like that. You got these issues that you're constantly having to explain to people, right? You've got all that stuff going on. You're probably not. Good reputation means you don't have handles. I always like that picture. Okay, so aspiring, no handles, above reproach. The third one, faithful to his wife. Okay, when he mentions this to Titus, he'll literally say one woman. And the big debate has been, is he talking about one woman at a time? which this sounds really bizarre in our day and age, but I actually think that's what he's talking about. Because he lived at a time where there was a lot of polygamy. And when you balance it out with what he says to Titus here, when he talks about faithful to his wife, because some people have looked at this requirement, especially in Titus where it says one woman, and they said, you know what, his wife died 25 years ago and he remarried, so he can't be an elder. And I think, no, it's not what it's talking about at all. Or somebody who's been through a divorce, but that divorce happened before they were a Christian. Or they were just a baby Christian at the time. They've developed a lot since then. I don't think any of that disqualifies a person. I really don't. What it's talking about is somebody who's faithful in the marriage relationship. I think that's what it's really talking about. And my illustration for this has always been, there are guys, I mean, we know this, we're guys. There are guys, you don't want to leave your wife in a room with them. You know what I'm talking about. All of you, your expression, you already know this, right? And then there are other guys in the church, the kind of men that you don't mind to be elders that, hey, I can't come pick you up, Willie. Would you go grab her and bring her home from here? And you feel just fine with that, right? Because the kind of person you can really trust. I think that's what he's communicating. He's got a strong relationship with his wife, and he's not flirtatious. He's not one of these he's not a one-woman man kind of, right? So, okay, so that'd be the third one. And then the fourth one, temperate, mine says. What does yours say? Okay, what is temperate? Do you know what the temperance movement was in the United States?
Sober. Well, I mean, not slow.
Yeah, get rid of alcohol.
But the next word is sober.
Okay. Okay. Temperance would have to do with not getting drunk, not losing control. And then the sobriety, in my translation, says self-control. So it's a little bit broader term.
Would temperate be more about not getting angry?
Well, he's going to deal with anger in just a minute when he talks about pugnaciousness. These are some terms. It's not a problem with the Greek, it's a problem with the way we're translating it. But the idea here is you don't have a drinking problem.
Yeah, but later on he says it on the third, not given to drunkenness. So
Not given to drunkenness.
if that's the same as
Well, temperate.
temperate, then.
Well, he's going to repeat this idea of being above reproach 3 different times.
Okay.
So there are some things he's really going to emphasize here, and the drinking he does hit more than once.
Does
'Cause I'm thinking with, he said being temperate, and then he says sober-minded. So
Right.
you think sober-minded would be the same thing as temperate? But
No,
it's not.
sober-minded would be a broader term, talking about more self-control in all of your life. Temperate would be more focused on the use of alcohol.
well, I thought temperate would mean you do things in moderation, whatever you do, whether it's drinking, eating, buying clothes or whatever. You're
I agree, the way we use the word, but I'm just telling you this word had a more of a focus in the Greek language on the drinking aspect.
okay.
Because I know, but today we use that, you lose your temper, means you got angry.
That's true, that's
So I think
true.
when you say temperate, it means you don't get angry either.
Right, right. And all I'm trying to say is don't get hung up on the English word. It's the Greek word that we're trying to translate here. And that word seems to focus, it's not exclusive to alcohol, but it does focus more on alcohol. And so you, again, go back to the first century and think about this. From what we know, culturally what's going on there. But he is making a principle that goes beyond the first century. I'll freely admit that. But they had wine as every part of everyday life, right? But you didn't want to be a person who had a problem with that. Some people, it just gets out of hand. And so, definitely. In fact, we know from what Paul says to Timothy, in a world that, I'm just going to say some things here, it may not be right, but I'm assuming the way it is in France. People I know in France, they drink wine every day, right? Anyway, the first century would be more that way because they didn't have Coca-Cola, they didn't have a lot of other options.
They didn't have clean drinking water.
So wine, they would typically water down the wine because it's usually in a lot of their meals, and so they'd have 3 to 1. They water it down 3 to 1 for the purpose of not having too much wine. But we know Timothy made a practice of no wine at all, right? Because Paul has to tell him, Timothy, you're going a little too far here. Right? There are times when it's okay. But nonetheless, in a culture like that, where it's so available, we'll talk about self-control in just a minute, but on the wine issue, it's kind of like you need to really have your guard up, right? Because you can lose control, things like that. I think there are other things like we today might have an issue with phones and things of that nature. That's just part of our culture and stuff like that. But nonetheless, you can fall into traps and waste too much time or get caught into seeing things on your phone you shouldn't even see. Right? And so the same principle applies. Even though it's part of everyday life, you keep your guard up. Okay, and then the self-control, and then respectable, that's above reproach. That's another way of saying above reproach. He's going to hit that again. So this idea of sometimes thinking, well, it's just between me and God. Well, a lot of things are between you and God. But there's a time and place to think about what other people think. Don't think about it too much, because you don't want to do stuff just to please other people. But we do need to be aware that we have a reputation in our community. And our leaders have a reputation. And I can tell you right now, at the gym, it's my one place in life where I have regular, interaction with people who don't go to church. There's a church in our town that has a very strong reputation, and a lot of it's not good. They're one of the biggest churches in our town, in the gym anyway, has a reputation. They just want your money. You talk about money every week. And every time we talk about church, oh yeah, money. No. We're not that kind of church, honest. We don't
even passively.
Yeah. But reputation, we need to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about what the world thinks about us to a degree. It doesn't determine right and wrong, but we need to be aware. Okay, let's have just one more verse.
Not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money.
Wow. Okay, what was the very first one at the beginning of the verse?
Not given to drunkenness.
Not given to drunkenness. Okay, mine starts with me. The problem is I've written so much I can't see the verse divisions anymore. And mine says hospitable. Was that a part of the previous verse?
That's part two.
Okay, and I cut off too soon.
Hospitable and able to teach was part of two.
Okay, hospitable and able to. Let me deal with both of those because the word hospitable, does anybody have a different translation there? Okay, it literally, the Greek word means a lover of strangers.
Friendly.
I really like that. Say what?
Friendly.
Friendly, yeah. But a lot of people are friendly with people they know. You know what I mean? And by the way, this is I just tell you, it's an issue that we always have to fight in church. Because a lot of your church families there are people you know. And unfortunately, when somebody comes in you don't know, you're so tempted just to focus on the people you know. And it's kind of like, stop it. Because you know these people, you can talk to them a whole bunch of other times. Focus on the person you don't know. That's part of what's going on there.
I haven't met a stranger yet.
Good. That's a good quality.
Yeah, you
really
just keep talking.
I have a big problem with that. That's one of my areas I really need to work on.
As far as people you don't know?
Yeah, I have a tendency, I stand off from strangers.
Oh, okay.
I stand off.
You're an introvert.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we all have different areas to work on, and this is one area, especially for leadership in the church. If leadership in the church is not concerned about people they don't even know, then we're going to have a problem. And I have to say this too, though, especially in the first century, there was a real problem with hospitality because the inns in the first century, dangerous place to stay. So if somebody didn't open their home to you, it's not like they had hotels and stuff like we do today. So as far as a traveler coming through or somebody like that, you really did need people to open up your homes or you suffer because of that as you travel. So this idea of lover of strangers is good. This ability to teach, just want to make the point, please don't put this in the wrong context. It does not say you have to be able to teach a crowd in front of a group. It's not what it says. It just says you have to be able to teach. Some of the best teaching, I really do think, takes place one-on-one. There's a lot of different ways to teach. But somebody who doesn't know the word well enough to be able to pass it on to somebody else. In fact, in 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, the 2nd verse, he's going to make the point, make sure you pass this on to trustworthy men who are able to pass it on to other people. So the ability to not just learn, but to pass it on to somebody else, that's the quality that we're talking about. So don't say, well, the person can get up front.
Like discipleship. So, talking to people.
We're all supposed to be involved in that.
Right.
Right.
But that's what you mean by not having to necessarily be in front of a whole group.
Doesn't have to be in front of a whole group. Yeah, discipleship, we're all supposed to be focused on bringing people closer to Jesus. I hope people are not embarrassed. I mean, I've had to do this so many times in my life too, even to today. There are times when it's kind of like, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I'm going to have to go get some help. But if somebody, is not able to teach, you still have to disciple. What that means is, come along with me. And I don't know this, but I can bring you to a place where somebody can teach you.
We'll bring you to men's class.
Yeah, bring you to Bible study with us. Yeah.
As long as it's a guy.
And we'll talk about, oh yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, hospitable, able to teach. Okay. Then the not given to drunkenness again, not violent. Does any of your translations say pugnacious?
I love that.
Okay, I'm glad we changed that because nobody uses that English phrase anymore.
Oh, you're so pugnacious.
Yes. What is a pugnacious person? Somebody who's yeah, has a chip on their shoulder, always waiting for a fight. Not violent, but gentle. Which, by the way, gentle is another word that pretty much means the exact same thing as self-controlled. Just another synonym here. So you notice how he's repeating some of these qualities? Yeah.
Meek comes to mind. Right?
Okay, meek and gentle, self-controlled. Doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you can control yourself, right? This is surprising to me. I always think Willie and I had a friend that came to church here for a while, a young man who had the worst anger problem I've ever seen anybody. And it was off the charts. And the first time I saw him just lose it at church, I thought he was joking. Oh no, he was having a meltdown. He lost control. I'm like, you're kidding me. This is your scooter. It's not a big deal. It's just right. But some people have issues like this. You sure don't want somebody in the leadership position who has that kind of lack of self-control. Okay, not violent, not quarrelsome. Okay, I think this is distinct from just because you don't get in a fight with somebody else. There are people who are just contrary. Remember how your mom used to use that word? Stop being contrary. It means, would you stop arguing everything that I say? Can't you just accept some things? Right? No. There are some people who are just, quarrelsome. Okay, the lover of money. Apostle Paul deals with this a bunch, especially at church at Corinth, because some people are in leadership positions in the church because they see it as financial gain. And because of that, the church in Corinth, Paul wouldn't take a penny from them. And he has to make the point, I have every right to take a salary from you, but I'm not, because you would misunderstand this, right? Well, some people, unfortunately, were doing the exact opposite. They were making a lot of money in the church. I'm grieved about this because we all know this. I think it applies to a lot of people. But if we just go to the extremes, why is it there are some people in ministry driving around, flying around in $88 million planes? I was talking to a friend who preaches at a very large church over in Orlando, and he was talking about another friend of his, a guy I don't know, but he knows him because even bigger church and everything, and they were joking about the $10,000 tennis shoes that he had. I'm like, you ought to repent, confess, repent, stop that. I don't think that's something to joke about, right? So it's not just the ladies who wear it, but somebody in ministry. Every area of life, there's some sacrifices that need to be made. I think one of the sacrifices that ought to be made for church leadership and ministry, I'm not saying people can't make a decent living and stuff. I'm all for that. But I don't think it ought to be beyond what everybody else makes in church. I think that's a problem. So anyway, this lover of money. I also think the idea, getting back to the reputation, I think when people think about the church or when they think about a leader in the church, they shouldn't be thinking, okay, he's going to talk about my finances again. He just wants my money. I don't think that's what ought to enter in people's mind. In fact, I personally think giving is an important part of a relationship with God, but I think that comes with maturity. And so I think, especially people who are new to the faith and stuff like that, I think we ought to walk lightly with stuff like that, because they're going to get the wrong idea. That's not what this is about. Right? And by the way, if people don't give it joyfully, they shouldn't be giving it in the first place. Right? You got to get to that point. Okay, so not a lover of money. Let's have one more verse and then we'll call it quits.
He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of full respect.
Okay, that's a good one to end on, this idea of managing your family well. Let me just ask you a question. Let me present it this way. Preacher, acquaintance of mine, he's no longer with us. He had 7 children. 6 of the 7 children, very, very, very good. In fact, some of them ended up missionaries involved in ministry. But one child turned her back on the Lord, didn't want to have anything to do with church or anything. Does that mean he shouldn't be a leader in the church?
No.
Okay, you said that pretty decisively. What's your reasoning there?
Well, first of all, I can just look within our own body and I can tell you nobody in the leadership position would. I just think that when a child, I'm sure he's talking about a child like a minor child versus an adult child. Because now maybe what you're talking about, it was a minor child that turned their back on God, but I'm thinking this is later. So, you know, as long as the person didn't cause the child to become disobedient or like exasperate,
From what I just told you, because I didn't give you very much information, to me it doesn't look like it's a parenting issue at all.
right.
Because if you had 7 children,
Right, the majority of them are.
yeah.
Yeah,
Now, if all your kids were going all over the map and some ended up Buddhist and all over the place, then it's kind of like, okay, I think you dropped the ball here.
Mhm.
But every child's different, you know.
Free will.
Yeah, that goes to the
Out of
free
the
will
sun.
thing, that's right.
Every child's different. The point is, though, are you doing what you should do as a parent? And the principle here, I think, makes good sense. The illustration I've always liked is if you hired a contractor to build your house and you wanted to go stop by his house to talk about some of the plans, and when you stopped by his house, you turned the doorknob and it fell off. You walked in, your foot went through the floor. The lights weren't working and stuff like that. You said, hey, who built your house? Well, I did. It's kind of like, probably not the person you want building your house. You can't build his own house.
But it would be cheap. Expand on it.
It'll be
Yeah.
most expensive.
Yeah. But the church is, one of the ways the church is pictured is as a family. And if you don't have family skills, we're all a work in progress. And the older I get, the more humble I feel about this idea of parenting. And you guys know my family situation. There was several years there. We were just praying a bunch. And I'm very thankful. But it's a challenge every day. It's a challenge, right?
The way I look at it is, if you can't control your own family, how are you gonna be able to control the church?
It's specifically what he's going to say.
The
He's
parentheses
going to say
here
it.
next.
Yes.
Verse 5, yeah.
Because we're talking about a family situation.
Isn't it kind of, it's similar to the, say this guy had younger kids, they're all, 10, 7, they're running around, everybody else has to spank them except for him. So that would be another sign.
It would be a sign, and this is kind of tied to reputation too, right? Because people know what you're doing. I so appreciate. I know we're out of time here, but my son has adopted a bunch of children, and there's a bunch of people in the church. We're an adoption church, and I tell you what, parenting's hard enough. When you talk about foster care and adoption, there is an extra measure of difficulty associated with it.
Kids are jobs already messed up. Where do you go?
So many times. So many times.
Rescuing dogs.
But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of respect for anybody that
Yeah.
would do that.
Yeah.
Because most of us would never even dream of trying to go there.
I had an interesting conversation. We're done.
Yeah.